And we're live. Thank you so much for joining us for our virtual presentation of A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, The World of Octavia Butler. We're so happy to have Linnell George and Dana Johnson here with us tonight. And we will be taking audience questions for the Q&A in the latter half of the event. So if you have a question for Linnell or Dana, just use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. You can also vote for any questions you find interesting, and they will make their way to the top of the list. Also, please consider supporting our bookstore by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book or any of Linnell or Dana's books. Just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen, and you will be taken to our website where you can complete your purchase. And Vroman's is 126 years old, and it's thanks to avid readers like yourselves who have kept our doors open. So every bit of support helps. And with that said, let me briefly introduce our speakers for tonight, and I'll let them take things from there. Linnell George is an LA-based journalist and essayist who has worked for the Los Angeles Times and LA Weekly. She's an arts and culture columnist for KCET Artbound and is also a Los Angeles Institute for the Humanities Fellow and a USC Annenberg Getty Arts Journalism Fellow. She is the author of After Image, Los Angeles Outside the Frame, and No Crystal Stair, African Americans in the City of Angels. And joining her tonight is Dana Johnson, who is the author of the short story collection in the Not Quite Dark, as well as books Break Any Woman Down and Elsewhere, California, both of which were nominees for the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. Her work has appeared in the Paris Review, Callaloo, the Iowa Review, and many others. So with that said, I'm going to minimize my camera and enjoy the talk, everyone.
Hey, everybody. Linnell, this is, I'm just going to hold up the book so everyone can see how beautiful it is. Congratulations. This is just a gorgeous book, beautifully written. And you've given us an Octavia Butler that we've not seen before.
Thank you.
So congrats on this. And I wanted to start by asking about your research and how this book came to be. It was 4 years of research and writing.
Yes.
That brought us to this moment.
Yes.
And the book is unique because it's like part biography, but we get Octavia Butler's biography through her practice of craft, the way she's writing. But you get all of this through the stuff that you found in the archives, which was incredible, like random things, ephemera.
Yeah.
You said in the introduction of the book that you fell hard for the marginalia, all the things that you were able to find. So, you know, usually we get to know authors through their letters and journals, but we get to see her because of the work you did in the research, this archival work. So can you start at the beginning and kind of tell us how this book, as you envisioned it, how you researched it?
Well, I'm going to have to start even a step back from that because this book was, in a certain way, a gift of serendipity. And first I want to thank Vroman's, for hosting us, because Vroman's was Octavia's bookstore, her neighborhood bookstore, which I've also found in the archive because she had notes about on her list of, like, you know, I have to stop at Vroman's today to go and get whatever. And one of my favorite is when she was transitioning to using a computer. She really resisted the computer for a long time. And then she kept losing files, and she kept saying, why is this machine eating things up? You know, I can't find them. But she would make a note, going to Vroman's to buy WordStar for Dummies, you know. So I'm really grateful that we're here tonight. This project started out of another project I was working on for Clock Shop, the LA-based arts organization that hosted Radio Imagination, which was a year-long look at Butler's legacy and work. And at different venues, we presented at different venues, and it was artists and writers in the archive. And Julia Meltzer, who's the executive director, she's the person, she tapped me and she said, would you meet me for coffee? And so she said, I would love it if you would consider doing a posthumous interview with Butler. And I thought, I don't know what that would look like and how I would do that, but I'm up for like spending some time in the archive. I was really excited about that. But then I get in the archive and which is, at the Huntington, and there are nearly 400 boxes of items, thousands and thousands of pieces of paper and her old pencils and a sweater and her notebooks. And it was a little overwhelming and it was a little daunting being in someone's stuff like that, and I kind of just didn't know where to start. And then once I calmed down, I just told myself, let the archive lead you. And that's where the marginalia came in. I first started looking at her. I wanted to get to her most personal voice that I could. And so I started looking at things. I didn't want to look at the manuscripts at all. I wanted to look at letters and journals and notes, like, her, to-do lists. And that's when I started to see the marginalia. And that's where her personal voice was really coming through, because I could see what she was working with during the day. Now, while I was going through that process and I started to a piece started to take shape, I was also getting pulled in a different direction, which was I was looking at all these personal items that looked like my own, these dime store notebooks that I bought at Save-On, like these little Mead notebooks, that I kept notes in, or the larger loose leaf notebooks, her bus pass, her library card. And I realized all of these modest little items were really essential in her self-creation. And what she ended up doing was not so much focusing on what she didn't have, because a lot of this stuff, in that she had, like for example, like the nicer diaries, those were hand-me-downs, or things that her mother, who was a domestic and worked in people's homes, her mom would get some of these things and books and bring them home to her, and she would just repurpose them. Right. And so when you look at this store of items in these boxes, she created something miraculous out of things that people had tossed aside. And that's a light bulb. Another light bulb went off, and I thought, well, that's not for this piece, but that may be something else. And that's how the book started.
Well, I think that's what makes this book so special. Because I would look at some of the images, just like the call slips from the library, or her bus passes, or, notes that she scribbled on envelopes, or like there was an order form for like a Star Trek uniform.
Yeah.
Later in the book.
Exactly.
Just these amazing things that I was thinking of, sort of like Butler as larger than life, legendary, canonical.
Right.
And what your book does is just brings her back down to us in a way.
Yes.
And so it feels so intimate. I feel really close to her.
Thank you.
Reading this material. And that's just something that we usually don't get. The fact that you decided not to focus on the manuscripts, but instead focus on her bus pass, right?
Yes.
And various things like that. That's like the brilliance of this book, because we know her in ways that, we wouldn't have ordinarily.
Thank you. Because the bus pass, she never drove, for example. And so, the cliche about LA, you can't get around in LA without a car, and, you have to drive. She never drove. But she inhabited the entire city. And that's the other fascinating thing about the archive. I can see where she went on buses, and she'd get on a bus and go to UCLA to go speak, or to go, or get on the bus to go to the downtown library, where she did a tremendous amount of research. In fact, she wrote her first book doing research out of the LAPL Central branch. She had her own table where she'd go, a regular table, and she treated the library like, you know, an office. But she went all over the place on the bus. And I think, and she used the bus as also a place, it's like a little writing place, you know, so she'd pull out one of those little notebooks, those little meat notebooks I was talking about, and start making notes, these beautiful notes about the city. So the bus was, you know, also a point of inspiration for her as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for me too, like I was thinking of just myself as a writer, just because I used to take the bus so much. I wasn't a driver early in my life, and I would take the bus all over LA and take the train.
Right.
And just a lot of work gets done if you're the kind of writer that's observing the world in the way that you should.
Right.
So she's inspirational in that, like the idea of like, yeah, just keep doing that. You know?
Right. Exactly. Like there's some really funny little vignettes that she would write out about, you know, fisticuffs that would break out on the bus, or like some kind of altercation, or, you know, somebody would be behind her smoking a J, and, you know, like a J.
Right.
And so, but if you think about Bloodchild, you know, and the collection of short stories and essays, Speech Sounds, that is set in a bus, you know. So, and I'm thinking that absolutely has to be drawn from notes from her bus rides. And so that's what I really wanted to go into, like, inspiration, you know, where do we draw inspiration when we are busy all day long? You know, where do you find it, you know?
That sort of someone in comments wrote, yes, the RTD bus, which exactly, I knew it as the RTD.
Yes.
But I guess now it's called, the bus system's called something else. But
I know, I'm used to the RTD too.
Yeah. I used to take it all the way from campus, USC campus, to West Covina. That was the
wow
bus that would get me home.
Did you ride on the bus too?
Oh yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
So, but this is connected to the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is the structure of the book, right? I mean, it ends up being a book that's a lifeline to writers. It's not only about Octavia Butler, although it is
right.
Octavia Butler's, it's about her, but it's also sort of instructional for those of us who are trying to live in the world as writers. And so exactly. why did you focus on that that way of doing the book? You could have written, you had this vast archive, you could have approached this book in so many different ways, but it's you're really focused on craft. So what were you thinking when you did that?
Because I felt that the book could be for more than just writers. It could be anybody that wanted to craft a life that was outside of what was expected. And so that everything, and a lot of it comes with trying to organize your time and the things that are most important to you. So it's about priorities and how to make things work when you, once again, you don't have a lot. There's just a humble store of things you have. And again, back to, like, she could have focused on what she didn't have. She focused on what she had. And that's the message I wanted to give to people, because it's like, you don't have to be, you can be a writer, and it's going to be helpful to writers to, I think, to look at this and go, okay, I have a full-time job, and I have, you know, and I live in a noisy house and in a noisy neighborhood, and there's no possible way I can get these things done. Or she didn't go away to retreats, and she didn't, like, all these things. She didn't have quiet time. She had to make it. So how do you make something happen when you don't have much and you're just kind of just striking two sticks together, and you're trying to get a spark. And so that's why I'm looking at like things like inspiration, encouragement. That's the other thing. Where does she derive encouragement? She couldn't always from people. People didn't really understand what her dream was. In fact, so many people told her that that's really nice. It's nice to have that as a hobby, but you're really thinking about doing that for a living? Like, you think that that's what you're going to be? And there's one line I think about so much. Keep your own counsel. Like, there's a point where she just decides, I'm going to stop telling people what my dreams are because they want to poke holes in them. So yeah. I think for anybody who is trying to achieve anything that, again, is outside of the parameters of what the people in their world think is acceptable or quote unquote normal or whatever, that here are ways you can go about doing it. And you get your sustenance and your structure and your inspiration and scheduling your time and acknowledging, though, too, that it's scary. Like, what you're getting ready to do is really frightening, but you need to keep going. And that was the other thing I was really impressed with, too, is her ability to bounce back.
Yeah, I really, that Keep Your Own Counsel chapter is really something. And underneath it, she wrote, what is not imagined is not attempted.
That's right.
And that chapter was extraordinary to me, because there's other sections too. You noted where she was so discouraged as a young writer, where people just did not get what she was doing. Mm-hmm. And they said, I was struck on one of the teachers said to her, must you indulge yourself?
Yes.
And I was like, what? Like, what kind of writing instruction is this? Like, must you? And then in that same sentence, must you indulge yourself in a self-serving question,
right?
Rather than proof, right?
Right. Exactly.
Someone asked her,
right.
And that's just so counterintuitive to vision, creativity.
And then also constantly trying to direct her into the smaller box. Like you get the comment about you're such a good writer, but why are you wasting your time with science fiction? So it's like the left-handed compliment is like, you're good, but don't do that. It's like, and she just kept going, okay, and then I'm going to keep going, just, and how she pulled that out of herself. It took tremendous strength and tremendous effort to do it. And some days were harder than others. Right. Yeah. But like you said, it's like, it's funny, after you and I spoken the other day, I just happened upon a journal entry to herself about a teacher accusing her of having written a paper she turned in, and she had to defend it. And she got to the point where she's like, I know they don't believe me. And so I'm the only one. I have to believe myself. And there's nothing I can really do, but she was tired of this happening. Like, it couldn't be that good because she wrote it. It couldn't possibly be that good, so.
Well, you and I talked about too earlier about just how much she means to us as African-American women writers who are born and raised here in California, Los Angeles in particular. And so these kind of stories, when she tells me to keep my own counsel, that is something that I carry with me, because it is very difficult sometimes when you feel like you're not being seen, or you're not being seen in the way that you need to be seen, that people aren't understanding the work that you do. So I really appreciate those moments in the book.
And I love too how she would, like, when moments like that would happen where someone would dismiss her or disparage her or underestimate her, again, some days she was fine and she'd let it roll off. but then there were other days where she would, you could see that it just attached to her, and she'd have to go home and journal about just that. And just that. And it would, and it's in the book, there's a chapter on what she would call sessioning, and which was different from her diary writing. It was her way of like solving a problem in the moment on the page. And she would, for example, she may be like revising a draft. It might be her second time of day, revising a draft, because, you understand her day started at 3 a.m, 2 a.m. She'd get up and write, while it was dark, and until the sun came up. And then she would go out and take a walk around the neighborhood, and she'd come back and shower and grab her breakfast and either take the bus to go to school or bus to go to work. She did not get home until late at night, and she'd write again, and so those were her days. So if something happened during that day that upset her, she held on to it until she could come home and session about it. So yeah, she could be revising a story and that thing was still bothering her. So you'll see in the archive, in the middle of a short story or an essay she's working on, she starts like going, well, that woman said to me at work today, XYZ, and I don't really understand what that meant. And what I should have said was, and she works it all out.
That's amazing.
And I was like, I like this. This is like, this way you get it out of you. You're not waking up at 4 a.m. with the committee's meeting in your head. You've got it out on the paper and you've solved it. So, or at least, you've gotten closer to solving it.
Right. There's, just related to this, there's a beautiful symmetry in two moments. Later in the book, you write how Octavia Butler's mom gave her first typewriter when she was 10. Yeah. And you dedicate the book to your mom, who, and she gave you your first typewriter.
Yeah.
And yeah, dedication to my mother, who bought me my first typewriter, which I just loved how that all came together. And I know through like talking with you about this, that well before Clock Shop, Octavia Butler was someone that you were drawn to many, many, many years ago, because you kind of tracked her as a journalist, as a fiction writer yourself. So I guess my question is just, what is the main thing about her? There's so much about her that speaks to all of us. Mm-hmm. But what was it so many years ago that made you, that made her a sort of signpost, a guiding light?
It's a really good question. I remember seeing her for the very first time in person, going to a reading with my mother, who was an English teacher, taught what we then called junior high school English, and then high school English. And she was the Butler fan. She was the person, like I have her copy of Dawn over here. And, she was the one who was like, we're going to, we need to have a wide range of African-American writers on our shelves at home, because I was too not getting them in school at all, period, zero. Mm-hmm. So first it was seeing this name on the spine of a book. And then I went one night to this reading, and it was most likely, I know I saw her at Esalen and at the now long defunct Midnight Special bookstore. It was almost need her. And she didn't read because she had what she writes about also in the archive, undiagnosed dyslexia. So she would talk. And so here I am, I probably was a teenager, sitting kind of looking up at her, tall, brown-skinned Black woman, just talking about all manner of things. I mean, politics and books and the city. And I feel like, it was her and Wanda Coleman, like those two figures were extremely important for me to see, like Black women out in the world, reading their stuff, talking about their stuff, people interacting with them. They were models, they were really necessary models in a way that as I got older and began to call myself a writer, that's when I really understood just how important it was to be in a room with them and be able to interact with them. And there's this great line that she writes a lot, like she would have to fill out these forms, these biographical information forms for her publisher. And sometimes she would do funny things like, Octavia, you mean that tall girl who was always writing? And I was like, yeah, Linnell, the tall girl who was always writing. So there was that too.
Yeah. The tall girl reminds me, there's yet another thing in the book that was really striking because I didn't know such a thing existed, but it was a receipt for tall girl shoes.
Yes.
So there's a store for tall girls and like what?
She spent a lot of time looking for clothes and shoes that would fit her. She had, I don't remember now the exact size, but there is a notation about that. She was always having to go to the tall gal shop, as it was called, to get pants that were long enough and shirts that were long enough. And, so she, like, I think about like the things like that took her as well, like having to go extra places to get things, when she's getting ready to go on book tour, for example. So she had like a uniform she would wear. She goes, I need more black pants. I need another this. I need, so, and she needed comfortable shoes because she loved walking when she would go to a new city. So she walked all over the place. So she'd have to go and get her tall girl shoes.
Right. Something else that's striking about this book is that you put front and center the fact that money was a problem. Yeah. For Butler. We know her as the MacArthur genius.
Right.
She's getting now, and she has been for a while now, the kind of attention she always deserved, but didn't quite get.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it's so moving to see very familiarly, like an envelope with a budget written out with like, this is for the phone, and this is for groceries. And this is like, that is very familiar to me. Yes. So I love that about it. And I guess I wanted to know why you felt it was important to have that kind of conversation about not just the writing life, but like, as you noted, for anyone who's struggling in life, that money is a real issue that people tend to not want to acknowledge as a real issue.
Exactly.
But Octavia Butler, you show us how she was working with what little she had.
Right. I mean, some days too, it would be fumes, and she would talk about. There's a moment in the book. And I had to kind of decide, like, which is the best example of this, because she's on deadline. She hasn't gone to the market. And she writes down, like, I've just made the most interesting meal. Popcorn. There was like popcorn and some ground meat. And I forget what else.
I saw that. Yeah, it was weird. It was like popcorn and a patty.
It's like, and I thought, I've done that. And because she had run out of money. And so she had to kind of do what she could to make it over. And part of what I really wanted to do was to show so much of her life was about balancing her checkbook. And so again, back to the manuscript pages. So she's working on Kindred or Parable of the Sower. But she, in the margins, she's got calculations for rent, lights, water. Can I coast until this time? Do I need to make a phone call to get some money that's been owed to me for 3 months? If I make that phone call, that's a long distance phone call. That's expensive. Now, do I have that money to do that. So these are the things she's weighing every day. And there is that thing about like, you know, the romance of the writer's life. Well, no, it was
I know.
gritty of the water. And I could totally relate to that kind of going, okay, where's that check? Where is that check? They said, looking in the, you know, into the mailbox, you know.
Yeah, no, I love that about, and it's also just a counterpoint to, you know, like there's so many writers who have like particular setups, like here's my library and here's
Right.
the room, my
Right.
study or whatever, and like you don't need all that.
Right. And that's
you
what
don't need it.
exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
you just need your if you're on the bus,
yes,
you get it done there.
yes,
If you're at home in the you get it done. You get it done however you need to get it done.
right. And that
however much money you have, and
that's absolutely. And that, I think that's why she would turn, for example, you mentioned the library. She couldn't start building a library for herself until later. She did. And she was happy to do it. And Vroman's was one of the places she went, not to do an advertisement, but one of the places where she started building her library. But, you know, there was a time as a child, and she talks about this, it's poignant, when she would go, there was a bookstore, she doesn't name it, but in Pasadena, Altadena, and she wasn't sure if it was open for Black people. So she would lean in, and it was a tiny store, and she asked the woman was okay if she came in to look, but she had places where she would go and get her her comic books. She had like scouted out, you know, like scoped out places, but the place she went to were the libraries. You know, that's where she did everything. That's why that ritual of the library was so important to her, and the librarians were so important to her, because they helped her, and they would sit with her, and they would show her things. And she read herself out of the Peter Pan room at the Pasadena Library early, and was like, I'm ready to go into the adult stacks, you know, because she was thirsty. She was really thirsty. But I think about like that, like if she hadn't had the library, you know,
right,
you know, and had access to those books and the help she got there, because she didn't need a lot. She just needed to be tuned a different direction, you know, like turned like, oh, here. Oh, okay. Thank you. You know, but, and she, for the rest of her life, was a huge supporter of libraries, which she called the free universities of
absolutely
the United States. So yeah, back to your question about just the money and having like, you know, access to things. So she was very grateful, and she gave back. She taught adults to read. She wrote op-eds about the library when the library burned down downtown. She wrote several pieces actually about it. So it mattered, you know, having that for her.
And something else you give us, it's kind of cool to see, because we have her you show us the kind of books she checked out, and like we just see what she was interested in, all manner of things.
Right. Oh, and the other thing about those call slips, the other way she used the library is when she was trying to figure out, like, when people were really starting to get to her about, you know, really, are you going to really be a writer? And she had a very dry spell. Like she went many years without publishing. She published one book, and it took 5 years for the next one to come out. She started looking for work. Like not so much looking for work. She was, well, what career could I do on the side? So some of those call slips that I found, and there's stacks and stacks and stacks of them, which was her doing research on, you know, based on what her personality traits were. Like, what could she do? I don't want to work with the public, you know. But
that's so great.
You know, so yes, I see somebody's mentioning the Octavia Lab, and that's why the Octavia Lab downtown is named after her.
I want to have time for questions, but I want to ask you two things very quickly. Okay. So, she is ours, and by ours I mean Los Angelinos and Californians. And but I know from your research and that she had sometimes she was not so in love with Los Angeles, and
No,
it was her home. It was where she was born and raised. But she was ambivalent sometimes.
yes.
And yet her work is so Los Angeles is there. It's in the work, and it's so important to her vision. And so I don't know. I guess I just was going to ask you, um, why do you think Los Angeles is important to Butler's work?
When I think about the environments that have mesmerized so many of us lately with Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents, you know, even the little glimpses, and when she's writing about environment and climate, she was able to observe things in her daily walks, and that is the thing that like just blows your mind. Is you're looking at, she was looking at, she called herself a news junkie, so she was looking at her newspapers, and listening to the radio and television, and has boxes of clippings about climate change, climate science. Really early, she's looking at that, and she's also looking at it in her own life on her walks. Looking at trees, cycle of growth, compared from this year. What isn't growing anymore? What didn't survive the drought? Is there a drought? Why? When is fire season starting? All of these things, she absorbed them, so looking at climate and looking at sense of place, looking at that really was important to her. Also, being so close to places like Caltech, where she had access not so much to Caltech, but to conversations around it. And even you think about like Hollywood, because this program that she that got her to Clarion, the Open Door program, is where she met Harlan Ellison, because he was doing a workshop there. So, and Ellison was, TV writer, so again, Southern California, this nexus, she had access to all of this different input and inspiration. And yes, LA frustrated her, just like so many of us Angelinos. Yeah. So there are funny little grumblings in there too. I'm like, yeah, I hear you, Octavia.
Yeah.
I understand, like she wanted to get out of here, and I was able to get out for a while, but she came back. And then she went back again. So
and then she went back.
Yeah.
This was so great. I wish we had 3 hours to keep
I know. Well, we'll continue.
Yes.
We'll find other places to do it publicly too.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. But I do want to give folks a chance. We've got some questions.
Okay.
Let me see here. Okay, well, here's kind of a straightforward one. For students who've never read Octavia Butler's work before, which book do you recommend them to start with?
It's really, I always tell people, like, it's not a one size fit all, with her, because with my friends, my adult friends, but I think for kids, younger people, I think Kindred is a good starting place, because the story, it's as she says, people always say want to call this science fiction, but it's not. It's more of fantasy, and then they'll press me on the fantasy part. But she slips through time. There's no machine, but it deals with history, and it's set in 20th century Pasadena. It starts out, and the main character, Dana, actually is. Once I started spending more time in the archive, I realized, wow, she gave Dana a lot of her jobs. So, so Dana is in certain ways her. It's a little bit of her too. So it's a way of, and then it's a book about, the legacy of enslavement. And so lots of things to discuss, lots of questions that come up without giving away too much. But I think that might be a good one.
Okay. Let's see. This is an interesting question. It says,
Okay.
what were some of the items in the archive? I lost it because something, there we go. What were some of the items in the archive that did not make it into the book, and why?
Oh
Was
gosh.
there something where you just thought, oh, I can't, or?
Oh, you guys should have seen my list of things I wanted to put. And it's just because I knew I could only do so many, but in order to tell a story, so each thing needed to represent a certain part of her life. So I'm trying to think of one of the ones that was like hard to not use. She really loved music, and so there's a lot of sheet music. There's a lot of she played accordion. she, um, she used to type out lyrics from pop tunes from the radio. So there's a lot of, I don't know if she just did it just for typing practice, but I also imagine she just did it, because she liked the lyrics, and and she arranged them as if they were poems. And so it's interesting. So you're reading these lyrics, and it's like a time capsule. You go right back to where she was at 12 or 13 or 15 and what was on the radio. I also wanted to, it's like her books on tape, collection. She had that, things that I was really looking at, things that nourished her or buoyed her.
Right.
As well as the things that were, that's why the bills are in there, is because the bills were a reality, and that was a thicket she had to get through. I wanted to, like I was mentioning, her pencils, I didn't want to get too nerdy with the tools, I wanted things that could open up, so I would have liked to have done more, like maybe with the clip files, but that was also a hard thing to do because she had such expansive interests. She had such a beautiful mind, and some of the things that really stay with me are just some of the pages where it's just random notes, and it's in different colors, and she's and it's about a phone number. It's not about anything. But you get a sense of what her day is, like a phone number to call the roofer. Some commercial came on, one of those K-Tel commercials that we grew up with, or some kind of, gimmicky, thing you don't need. She'd write that down, so I liked things like that told me what was going on in her life during that moment. So that's something I, if I had a chance to do, an extended there's a bunch of stuff that I would want to do and could write an essay about.
Right. It's so strange. I'm stuck on it was a throwaway line that you said, but there was a sweater in the archive.
Yeah. It's one of her school sweaters.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
And her yearbooks are in there. So it talk about like going off path. It's like some days I would have to force myself, like, you're going in to do this today, but then something like, oh, look at that. So one day I spent like a full day looking at her yearbooks and the inscriptions that people wrote. And so it's funny when you see one of her friends write, "Good luck in the future." And you're
like, check.
Yeah.
Will do.
And the layers of the future we're dealing with her. Oh, and I did want to mention the calendars because they're so important, in the sense that I'm always struck in every way how she bent time, like her own time in her own life, how she got so much done, in one day. It's just miraculous. And the calendars, which there's a chapter where I deal with the calendars. It's amazing how she utilizes those, to keep up with her page counts. And
I was going to say she had her priorities, because there's one notebook where every single day it says "write" in really big letters, and then in small, "study for bio."
Yeah,
Tuesday,
exactly.
"write." Study for Spanish.
Yeah.
Right. It's like every week was just "write" in capital letters, and then the other things on the side. But here's another question. It's this Amanda Traeger says, I'm curious about Butler's early readership generally, and to what extent this group included people of color. How did people come to her work? How was it marketed? I read that early covers hid the fact that its main subjects were Black.
That was a real sticking point. She's very angry, very, 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 very angry. And she had written a lot of hot letters about the covers of her books. And they're, you know, where it's white people or like there's no white people in this book. And she tried her best to get better representation on her covers. She was really, really very angry about that, because her whole point was about writing herself in. Since she was 4 years old, she had been trying to write herself in, you know, by telling stories to herself. She was, as she says, I'm the star of my stories. Ever since I started writing, and she wanted to open up the walls. She's had her readership. She writes a lot about trying to build a Black science fiction community. She would go to these conferences and she talks a lot about it, and be the only Black person or one of three, and I don't mean presenting, just at like one of the conventions. She would just be there. She often talked about Chip Delaney, but you know, and he was an important influence in her life. But there's like one of her sessioning notebooks is devoted to thinking about her readership. You know, the difference between, she called them the new age, the new age white people who were her readers, the African-American readers, what they wanted in a book, what feminists would want in a book. This is later though, but she had actually started to break down, you know, who her readers were, and trying and kind of looking at like why they might come to her work, and how to get more Black people, and why should and that's a question she was often asked, is why science fiction should be important to Black people. What good was it for Black people? And that's actually an answer. The title of the book comes from one of those things she was always trying to put together. People would ask her, you know, what is science fiction? And she said, science fiction is a handful of earth, a handful of sky, and everything around and in between. Because she's trying to ground it and let, you know, like, you start with what people know and let them walk into it. And then you add a little bit of this, a little bit of that, as she does in her own life, you know, with bus passes and the this and the that. So, yeah.
We have time for one more question. It's so hard because these are all good. And I guess I'm going to go with this one. Cicely Wedgeworth asked, we seem to be seeing a new crop of movies, TV shows, and books that are telling Black stories in fantastical settings. Lovecraft Country, Get Out, Underground, Bad Hair, etc. How do you feel the fantasy genre may offer more scope for expressing the Black experience, even though it's, quote, not, quote, real? Conversely, how can Black voices enrich sci-fi fantasy?
Right.
It's a big question, but
yeah, it's a big question. I'm going to answer it in a bite-sized way. I'm going to answer it around her first, because that's what she really wanted film to be made about one of her books, because she knew how powerful that would be for a young person. Here, she's a person who went from her little like tiny fantasies and, you know, love stories. She saw this terrible movie, Devil Girl on Mars, from Mars, and thought, this is awful. I can do better than this. As a kid, she thought. It inspired her to be a writer. Movies are powerful. She wanted her films, and her films have been, like Kindred, like I can't tell you how many options I kept seeing, like coming in the mail, like in her files for Kindred, and who held it. I think, I know she would be thrilled to see that there are so many other ways and so many storytellers attempting to do what she was trying to do sitting at her little desk here in North Pasadena, and doing it in ways that will allow other young people like herself, like, oh, that's a path. I don't have to work so hard. I don't have to prove to someone that I can do that. I think all of us, I was thinking about this the other day, just about how many Black writers I know in any genre they're writing in, are doing exactly what she did. We've all been trying to write ourselves in. I did as a journalist. Like, I grew up in a place where you look on the news or read, they weren't really writing about the neighborhoods I grew up in.
No.
Or fiction. By the time I met Dana because I interviewed her when her short story collection, Break Any Woman Down, came out. I was blown away because I just thought, I haven't read this. I haven't read anything like this. And we ended up having this like long, but those are the conversations. And this is why this is so important. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I think this is going to open up all kinds of things, but we've been doing this forever. And there's that famous, Toni Morrison quote, I write the books that I wanted to read.
Yeah.
So, so hopefully those who are gatekeeping will be more open to them now, and we can get in and create our own.
Good. Yes. I was thinking too, when you said, when we were just talking about movies, I was so excited to see Antebellum, and that because then I was worried it was going to be a ripoff of Kindred.
I know, that's what my friends are saying. Yeah.
What is going on? But then it was nothing like that. And then I wished they had done Kindred. Yeah,
I didn't see it because somebody, they're like, yeah. So,
yeah. Our host said that we're
hi.
Hello. Sorry, there was a bit of a lag. Well, thank you, Linnell. Thank you, Dana. That was such a great conversation. And, thank you to everyone who tuned in. Like, the chat was very active.
Thank you
so much. Yeah. It was so wonderful. I'm so sorry we can get to everything.
I know.
But, when this is over, you won't be able to stop us.
And I just want to say, you guys, you're in for a real treat when you purchase this book and read it. It's just wonderful. So I'm going to reread it because I need some help from Octavia.
Yep. Yes. I went back to her yesterday. So
okay.
Just so you know, I'll share that with you later too. I found a good thing that would be helpful for us as writers.
Good.
But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vromans.
Yes, thank you, Vroman.
Before we end the stream, again, if you guys are interested in purchasing a copy of Handful of Earth and Handful of Sky, you can just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer's screen. It'll take you to our website. And also, our next virtual event is scheduled for next Thursday, November 5th, with Barbara Abercrombie and Jacqueline Winspear. And the replay of this conversation will be available within an hour or so. So it'll be up pretty shortly. If you tuned in late, you can watch the beginning. Just use the same stream link and you'll be able to rewatch it.
Yeah.
And I think that about does it. Stay safe, everyone, and have a good night. Right.
Bye, Linnell.
Bye.